My daughter called me on a Tuesday morning while I was frying eggs. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She just said, "Dad, the lake house is sold. We closed yesterday. You have until Friday to get your things out. The developers want to break ground by Monday." I stood there in my kitchen with a spatula in one hand and the phone in the other, listening to the sound of my whole life being pulled out from under me. I asked her to repeat what she had just said because surely I had misheard. She sighed like I was wasting her precious time. I said, "We sold it, Dad. The lake house. The whole property. Derek and I handled everything. You should be thanking us. That place was falling apart and you were just sitting there watching it rot. We got $6 million from a resort developer. It is done. Be out by Friday." Then she hung up. I turned off the stove. The eggs were burning, but I didn't care. I walked to the window and looked out at the lake. My lake. Garrison Lake, in the Adirondacks, surrounded by white pines that my father planted when he came home from Korea. I had lived in this house for 42 years. My wife Ellen and I built it together in 1983, back when I was a young architect with more ambition than sense, and she was a school teacher who believed in me when nobody else did. Every beam, every stone in the fireplace, every angle of every window was drawn by my hand and blessed by her smile. Ellen died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast and cruel. After she passed, I stayed because this was where she still lived. In the creaking of the porch swing, in the lavender she planted along the walkway, in the scratches on the kitchen floor from the dog we raised together. My daughter Jessica knew all of this. She grew up catching fireflies in that yard. She had her first kiss on that dock. And now she was selling it to a resort company so they could tear it down and build luxury condos for people who would never know the name of a single tree on the property. I tried calling her back. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Blocked. I called my son-in-law Derek's number. He picked up on the second ring. As ran the word. "Sense time. Harrison," he said, using my first name the way he always did, like we were business partners instead of family. "Look, I know this is sudden, but it is the right move. Jessica and I have been carrying a lot of financial weight lately, and this property is just dead equity sitting there doing nothing. You are 67 years old. You don't need a 4-bedroom house on a lake. We found you a spot at Pinewood Senior Living. It is clean, it is safe, and they have bingo on Thursdays. You will love it. A senior home. They were putting me in a senior home. I built skyscrapers. I designed the Whitfield Center in Albany, the Civic Library in Syracuse, the waterfront pavilion that won a National Design Award in 2004. And my son-in-law, a man who sold used cars until I got him a job at a real estate firm, was telling me I would love bingo. "Derek," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my hands were trembling. "That house is in Jessica's name. I understand that. But there are things about that property you do not know, things that will make this deal very complicated." He laughed. It was a dismissive sound, the kind of laugh you give a child who thinks the moon is following the car. "Harrison, relax. The paperwork is done. The money is in our account. The developers did their due diligence. Everything is clean. Just pack your bags and enjoy retirement. You have had a good run." He hung up. I stood there for a long time, holding the phone, looking at Ellen's reading chair by the fireplace. There was still a bookmark in the novel she never finished. I walked over and touched the spine of the book. I closed my eyes. Dang, they thought I was a sentimental old man who had lost his edge. They thought I spent my days doing crossword puzzles and feeding the birds. They forgot that I was an architect. And an architect does not just design buildings. An architect designs systems. An architect thinks about what happens in 50 years, in 100 years. An architect plans for earthquakes that haven't happened yet. I picked up the phone and called a number I had not dialed in 5 years. A woman answered with a voice like gravel and honey. "This is Constance Wu. Who is calling at 7 in the morning?" "Connie," I said. "It is Harrison Dwyer. I need you to open the Garrison Lake file. The one from 2012. "Yes. The conservation easement. My daughter just sold the property to a resort developer. She doesn't know the file exists. There was a pause. Then Connie let out a low whistle. Oh, Harrison. That poor girl. She just walked into a minefield. She did, I said. And she dragged the developer in with her. Get dressed, Connie. We have a lot of work to do before Friday. Let me explain something. When Ellen was diagnosed, we sat on the porch and talked about what mattered. The wetlands on the north shore where the herons nested every spring, the brook that fed into the lake where the trout spawned. Ellen made me promise that no matter what happened, the land would be protected. So in 2012, I did something that most people in residential real estate never think about. I placed a perpetual conservation easement on the entire 40-acre parcel through the Adirondack Land Trust. A conservation easement is a legal agreement that restricts what can be done with a piece of land forever. It runs with the title. It survives any sale, any transfer, any foreclosure. It means the land can never be developed. No condos, no resorts, no commercial construction. The trees stay. The wetlands stay. The herons keep nesting. When I transferred the house to Jessica 8 years ago to simplify estate planning, I gave her ownership of the structure, the building, the walls, and the roof. But the conservation easement was recorded separately, attached to the land parcel itself. Jessica never asked about it. She never read the documents. She just signed where the sticky arrows pointed and went back to scrolling through her phone. The developer, Lakeview Premier Properties, would have found the easement if they had done a proper environmental title search. But they were moving fast. Jessica and Derek were desperate for cash, so they offered the property at $6 million, well below the $9 million appraised value. When a deal looks too good, developers get greedy. They skip steps. They rush the due diligence. They see dollar signs and miss the fine print, and the fine print was going to eat them alive. I didn't leave the house on Friday. I didn't pack a single box. Instead, I sat in my chair on the porch, drinking coffee, watching the lake turn gold in the morning light the way it had every morning for 42 years. At noon, a black Escalade pulled into my driveway. Derek got out first, wearing a leather jacket and aviator sunglasses like he was in a music video. Behind him came 2 men in polo shirts, with clipboards. They were the developer's advance team, here to survey the property, before the demolition crew arrived on Monday. Derek walked up to the porch and stood in front of me with his hands on his hips. Harrison, he said, why are you still here? The movers were supposed to come yesterday. I took a sip of my coffee. I didn't move from my chair. The movers were never called. Derek. Because I am not leaving. He took off his sunglasses and looked at me with that expression I had come to know so well. It was the look of a man who thought he was the smartest person in every room, despite all evidence to the contrary. Listen, old man. The deal is done. The money is in the bank. Jessica owns this house and she sold it. You have no legal standing. One of the survey guys was already walking toward the tree line with a measuring tape, eyeing the white pines my father had planted. I watched him snap a branch off one of them like it was nothing. That branch was older than he was. Derek, I said, setting down my coffee. I want you to call your buyer. I want you to tell them to send their lawyer to this address tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And I want you to bring Jessica. Why would I do that? He scoffed. Because if you don't, I said, looking him dead in the eye, the next call I make is to the state attorney general. And trust me, Derek, you do not want that call to happen before you have a chance to understand exactly how much trouble you are in. Something in my voice must have gotten through, because for the first time since I had known him, Derek looked uncertain. He stared at me for a long moment, then pulled out his phone and walked back to the Escalade. I heard him arguing with someone. Then he drove away without saying goodbye. The survey guys left with him. I spent that evening alone. I cooked a steak, poured a glass of the bourbon Ellen used to buy me for our anniversary, and sat by the fireplace. I looked at her portrait above the mantel. She was laughing in the photo, her hair blowing in the wind on the dock, holding a rainbow trout she had caught. She hated fishing, but she loved surprising me. I am going to keep my promise, Ellie, I said to the empty room. They are not touching your trees. The next morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, my driveway looked like a parking lot. There was Derek's Escalade, a silver Mercedes that belonged to Jessica, a black town car carrying two men in expensive suits from Lakeview Premier Properties, and Connie's ancient Volvo station wagon that she had been driving since the Clinton administration. Connie was already inside, sitting at my dining table with 3 folders arranged in front of her. She was 72 years old, 5 feet tall, and she had the legal instincts of a rattlesnake. She had been the top environmental attorney in the state before she retired. She came out of retirement for me because Ellen had been her best friend for 30 years. They filed in one by one. Jessica came in last. She was wearing designer clothes and carrying a handbag that cost more than my truck. She looked around the house like she was inspecting a crime scene. She didn't hug me. She didn't say good morning. She just sat down across from Connie and crossed her arms. "Dad," she said, "I don't know what kind of stunt you are pulling, but this is embarrassing. The deal is closed. You need to accept it and move on." I didn't respond to her. I looked at the 2 men from Lakeview. One was the CEO, a man named Victor Hale, who had the tan and the teeth of someone who spent more time on golf courses than construction sites. The other was their in-house counsel, a younger man who was already sweating. "Gentlemen," I said, "thank you for coming. I understand you purchased this property for $6 million with the intention of demolishing the existing structure and building a luxury resort." Victor Hale nodded, adjusting his cufflinks. "That is correct, Mr. Dwyer. And frankly, I don't appreciate being summoned here, like a schoolboy. We have a valid contract, a recorded deed, and a wire transfer confirmation. This property belongs to Lakeview Premier now. The building belongs to Lakeview." I corrected him. "The structure, the wood, and the stone, and the glass. That is what my daughter had title to. That is what she sold you." Victor frowned. "What are you talking about?" I nodded to Connie. She opened the first folder and slid a document across the table. It was the conservation easement, recorded with the county in 2012, bearing the seal of the Adirondack Land Trust and my signature. "This," Connie said in her calm, precise voice, "is a perpetual conservation easement covering the entire 40-acre parcel on which this house sits. It was executed in 2012 and recorded with the Essex County Clerk. Under New York state law, a conservation easement runs with the land in perpetuity. It cannot be sold, transferred, revoked, or extinguished by any subsequent owner. It restricts all commercial development, prohibits demolition of natural features, and requires approval from the Land Trust for any structural modification exceeding 500 square feet." The room went silent. Victor's lawyer grabbed the document and started reading, his face getting paler with every line. "That means," Connie continued, "that your plan to demolish this house and build a resort is legally impossible. The easement prohibits it. You cannot break ground. You cannot remove trees. You cannot alter the shoreline. You cannot build so much as a tool shed without the Land Trust's written consent, which they will never give, because the entire purpose of the easement is to prevent exactly what you intend to do." Victor turned to his lawyer. "Did we know about this? Tell me we knew about this?" The lawyer shook his head slowly. "The title search focused on ownership and liens. We did not run a separate search on conservation encumbrances. It was not flagged." Victor's face went from tan to crimson. "You did not check for a conservation easement on a 40-acre lakefront property in the Adirondacks." Jessica shot up from her chair. "This is ridiculous. Dad, you are making this up. There is no easement. I own this property. I have the deed." "You have a deed to the building, Jessica," I said quietly. "And the building sits on land that is permanently protected. You sold these people a house that can never be torn down, on land that can never be developed, for $6 million. You represented that you had clear title and full development rights. You didn't. That is fraud. I am not a fraud, she screamed, her voice cracking. You tricked me. You set this up. I set nothing up. I replied. I made a promise to your mother. I protected this land because she asked me to. You never asked about the easement because you never cared about the land. You only cared about the money. Derek, who had been standing in the corner trying to look invisible, suddenly stepped forward. Okay. So there is an easement. Fine. Harrison, just release it. Sign a waiver or whatever. The deal goes through. Everyone is happy. Problem solved. Connie actually laughed. She looked at Derek with the kind of pity you reserve for someone who has just said something spectacularly stupid. A perpetual conservation easement cannot be released by the grantor, she said. Once it is recorded, it exists forever. Mr. Dwyer could not undo it, even if he wanted to. It is held by the Adirondack Land Trust, a separate legal entity. They will never consent to releasing it for a resort development. That is the entire point. Victor Hale stood up. His chair scraped against the hardwood floor. He turned to Jessica and Derek, and the look on his face was not the look of a business partner. It was the look of a man who had just realized he had been robbed. You sold us a property with an undisclosed conservation easement, he said, his voice trembling with controlled rage. You represented full development rights. Our entire project plan, our investors, our permits, everything is based on the assumption that we could build on this land. You have cost us $6 million and potentially tens of millions more in projected revenue and investor commitments. I didn't know, Jessica pleaded. I swear I didn't know about the easement. Ignorance does not absolve you of liability, Victor snapped. You signed the representations and warranties in the purchase agreement. You warranted that the title was free of encumbrances. It wasn't. That is material misrepresentation. That is fraud, and we are going to treat it as such. He turned to his lawyer. File a demand for full restitution immediately. $6 million plus damages. And call the district attorney's office. I want a criminal referral for real estate fraud and theft by deception. The lawyer was already typing on his phone. Jessica collapsed back into her chair. The designer handbag slipped from her fingers and hit the floor. Not the theatrical fear of someone who is caught in a lie. The genuine, primal fear of someone who has just realized the ground beneath them is gone. Dad, she whispered, you have to help us. We spent the money. We paid off Derek's debts. He owed people. Dangerous people. We had to pay them. We used almost $4 million to clear everything. The rest was supposed to be our fresh start. If they take it back, we have nothing. We owe them $6 million we don't have. I looked at my daughter. I thought about the little girl who used to sit on my lap while I drew blueprints. I thought about the teenager who cried on my shoulder when her mother was in the hospital. I thought about the woman who had called me 3 days ago and told me to be out of my own house by Friday, who had put me in a senior home without asking, who had sold my home to pay for a lifestyle she could not afford. Derek owed people. That was the part that hit me hardest. Not credit cards, not business debts. People. The kind who don't send invoices. For months, I had noticed the signs. Derek showing up with bruises he blamed on the gym. Jessica canceling holiday plans at the last minute. Nervous phone calls they took in other rooms. They were drowning, and instead of coming to me for help, they had decided to sacrifice me. I sat there for a long time without speaking. Everyone in the room was watching me. Derek was staring at the floor. Finally, I spoke. You could have come to me, Jessica. That is what hurts the most. You could have sat at this table and told me the truth. You could have said, Dad, we are in trouble. We need help. And I would have helped you. I would have sold something. I would have found a way, because that is what family does. But you didn't come to me. You went around me. You treated me like an obstacle. You decided that my home, your mother's home, was just an asset to be liquidated. You threw away 42 years of memories to cover 3 years of bad decisions. And you never once asked how I felt about it. Jessica was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking. Derek wouldn't look at me. I turned to Victor. Mr. Hale, I understand your anger, and I believe it is justified. My daughter misrepresented the property. That is between you and her. But I want to offer you something. Victor narrowed his eyes. I am listening. The conservation easement prevents commercial development, I said. But it does not prevent residential use. This house can remain. A single-family home on this property is fully compliant. I am prepared to work with you to find a fair resolution. I will not help you build a resort. But if you want to walk away from this deal cleanly, I will cooperate with any legal process to void the sale and return the title to its proper state. You will get your money back from the proceeds of the fraud recovery, and you will not have to spend years in court fighting the land trust. Victor looked at his lawyer. The lawyer nodded slightly. And my daughter, I continued. I looked at Jessica. She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. I will not be filing a separate civil suit against her. The criminal system will handle what it handles, but I am not going to pile on. She is my daughter, and despite everything she has done, I am not going to be the one who destroys her. I am just going to be the one who stops her from destroying herself. The room exhaled. Connie began organizing the paperwork for the voiding of the sale. Victor and his lawyer stepped outside to make calls. Derek sat in the corner with his head in his hands, the reality of criminal charges and civil liability crashing down on him like a building he couldn't design his way out of. Jessica stood up and walked toward me. Her makeup was ruined. Her expensive clothes looked ridiculous in the old farmhouse kitchen. She stopped about 3 feet away, not sure if she was allowed to come closer. I hate myself, she said. Her voice was barely audible. Mom would hate me too. Your mother would never hate you, I said. She would be heartbroken, and she would want you to fix this. Not with money, not with schemes. By becoming the person she raised you to be. Can you ever forgive me, Dad? I looked at her for a long time. I thought about the eggs burning on the stove 3 days ago. I thought about Derek calling me old man. I thought about the bookmark in Ellen's novel. Forgiveness takes time, Jessica. Trust takes longer. But I am still your father, and this is still your home. When you have paid what you owe and faced what you have done, the porch light will be on. That is all I can promise right now. She nodded. She didn't try to hug me. She knew she hadn't earned that yet. The sheriff arrived an hour later. He was polite and professional. He read Jessica and Derek their rights. Derek cried. Jessica was silent, her jaw set, something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. It might have been the beginning of accountability, or it might have been shock. I couldn't tell. As the patrol car pulled out of the driveway, I stood on the porch and watched it disappear down the tree-lined road. The white pines my father planted swayed in the breeze, their branches whispering in a language older than any contract. I walked inside and sat down in Ellen's chair. I picked up her book and opened it to the bookmarked page. I read the first line out loud to the empty room, and the words filled the silence like water filling a dry creek bed. The house was quiet. The lake was still. The trees were standing. I had kept my promise. Here is what I learned. Sometimes, love means letting someone fall so they can learn how to stand on their own. I spent 30 years catching my daughter every time she stumbled, and all I taught her was that falling had no consequences. The hardest thing a parent can do is step aside and let the ground teach the lesson you were too soft to deliver. But it is also the most loving thing, because a bruise heals. A life built on lies does not. If you have ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and protecting yourself from them, I understand you, and I want to hear your story. End quote. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what this story meant to you. If you believe that integrity matters more than money, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It costs nothing, and it means everything to me. Until next time, protect what matters. Not because it is valuable, because it is irreplaceable. Amai. Problem 16 May. Problem 16 May. 2314. My. Problem 16 May. A mine on. A mine on. A mine on friend. A mine on friend.